Welcome back to the Motherhood Collective Co.
I'm so happy.
I'm so happy too.
I've seriously missed this so much.
I know. I miss having someone because usually I'm staring right here at this camera now when I'm doing these Q&As and I just don't stop talking. I don't think I breathed in our last episode.
I know. It's like I was having so much FOMO watching all the videos. I'm like, oh, I could totally be there. Even like 2 weeks postpartum, I'm like, I can come and record.
Because we got our camera set up just like 2 weeks before. It was 3 episodes before.
I know.
So like now you don't even look like you're on our page. So
I was thinking that. I'm like, and because like I feel like we've gotten so many new listeners since I've had Ledger.
I know.
That I'm like, I don't even know if people know that this is our podcast. Like, is it you and Kate's? Is it you and other Amanda's? Like, there's like all, is it just yours? Like, I'm here, I'm back, and we'll be more consistent with my face.
Yes, we'll get you back.
Yeah.
Integrated in.
I know. I remember recording without you, and I just like missed you so much. I'm like, wait, I actually don't want to do this if I'm not doing it with you.
I know. And it's hard to like come up with guests and topics and
yeah.
All by yourself. It's fun when it's just natural friendship, talking.
Yeah, like what we'd be doing whether the camera was on or not.
I know. Sorry, that latte is probably really hot.
Is it really hot?
I didn't put milk in it. It's just Equip protein powder and collagen.
It's so good.
I love them.
It's so good.
I gave you a box of dandelion tea after you had
I know.
Ledger.
And I drink all of it because I was reading that it's a diuretic and it can help you like rid excess fluid of your body.
Dandelion also just like helps your liver detox. So after, you know, surgery and epidurals and a lot of, you know, sometimes birth requires medicine and it just helps. Not even just that, like your hormones.
Yeah.
Hormones.
Well, even like I was trying to research like how do I bring my blood pressure down because of like the postpartum crap, which we can talk about. Like all of a sudden my blood pressure was astronomical. And so that was one of the things was to drink that tea. So I drank the entire box of tea. Good. And it was just perfect because it just so happened to be that you dropped it off. And I'm like looking on Google, I'm like, what can I drink to like lower my blood pressure? And it was like dandelion root. So
Amanda already brought that to me.
Yeah, so she just knew that was going to happen. It's perfect. Here we are.
Well, okay, let's do a little catch-up episode because it's been a while since like we've all talked. I mean, you have a baby now.
Yeah.
So that's fun. And his name is?
A baby, Ledger.
Little Ledger. And how big was he?
It's 10 pounds, 2 ounces.
I love it.
10 pounds, 2 ounces. My jaw hit the ground.
Yeah.
I knew that he was big. Like, I knew that he was big.
Well, I remember sitting here. You were wearing your your little flower shirt.
Yep.
That's on our page. And I was saying, Jessie, that's going to be a big baby. And you're like, they don't think he's big. They just think I have a lot of fluid.
And I did have a lot of fluid.
You did. And he was also huge.
Yep.
Is that light still red, by the way? Will you keep
it is. Okay. I think that part of why I didn't think that he was going to be so big is because he was moving around so much. I'm like, how can you be 10 pounds and just flipping the whole pregnancy? You know?
Yeah.
I guess that was my logic behind it. And they always had a hard time palpating.
Yeah.
So I was like, maybe he's just small. No, I just had like a ton of fluid. But anyways, should we just get right into it? How should we do this?
Yeah, just tell your story.
Do you want to just like, okay, I'll just tell you like Do you
remember, I was going to say, do you remember like our first 2 episodes where we like grilled each other about our births? Let's not do that. I liked when we... We like wrote out questions.
Do you remember? Oh my gosh, we did.
We did. My husband, so Brady just released his
episode.
podcast, which he doesn't want me to share about because it's it's specifically only for Gonstead doctors. So he doesn't want other people finding it. So it's like
so pretend you didn't hear that.
Yeah, pretend you didn't hear that. I didn't say anything. But he was, you know, he's a perfectionist. Him and you are like the same person. But he's like doing the perfectionist thing to where he can't even like get it out, right? And I'm like, bro,
I'm the same.
When Jessie and I started our podcast, we literally had like scripts written out, like 10-page Google Docs. We did.
Literally.
We did.
Yeah.
And now 20,000 listens later, 22,000 listens later, 52 countries around the world listening to our podcast.
Almost 10,000 followers on Instagram.
Yes.
Not even a year.
Yeah.
A year next week.
Yeah. And the 17th.
Yeah,
is when we
the
started.
17th.
So we don't use scripts anymore. So that's fun.
I know. And it's actually so much more fun.
It is.
we were like researching and like, which I love research, don't get me wrong, but like to prepare for an episode with that much effort. And now I think we have 2 kids, which makes a big difference. Like we don't have the time to do the homework to prepare for.
When we first started too, we were just like barely friends. We had just kind of met, right?
Yeah.
We like went to one concert together and then I'm like, hey Jessie, do you want to do a business together?
I know. That's actually so crazy if you look back on it. Like, but I had so much peace. Like when you were sitting across my kitchen table, you had just come back from this business retreat conference, like hyping you up. And I'm like, wait, that actually sounds, and it was along the lines of like dreams that I had harbored for a long time, but I'm a perfectionist, much like Brady. And if I don't feel like I know the full scope of everything that something would entail, I'm not going to start it.
Yeah.
And so I have all these dreams that I'm like so excited about, but like they've never launched because I'm just a perfectionist. I have like 4 half-written books. Yeah. But I'm like, oh, the plot is not perfect. So
it's the same way. So if you ever see a typo on our page, it's because it's from me. I get stuff done, but I don't do it perfectly.
Amanda printed out all of these papers. Do you remember to bring
to my office for Brady's office
to bring to Concise? And I was dying. I walked in there. I was like, Amanda, there's like 4 different words on here that are not. She's like, well, they're there. I'm like,
I did fix those.
Yeah, you did. You did fix them.
But they were up for a few
But
weeks.
no, I think we're really good for each other. Mm-hmm. You have taught me how to just let go and just do it. Because it's better than just, and look how much we've learned.
I know, you just learn along the way.
Look at all this high-tech equipment we've had to figure out. Who would have ever thought? From our iPhone recordings. And
oh my gosh, our iPhone recordings. Now we've got like a $2,000 lens.
Crush it. I know, thank God for your husband too. Can we just say that? I'm like, oh my gosh, he cared way more than we did.
Well,
and
it was the
paid
episode
off.
about Lily's birth. And he watched the reels from that and he bought a camera. He's like, Amanda, I can't look at another one of those. I cannot.
I know. I'm seriously so grateful though, because I don't think either of us would have cared enough to,
and we've got a lot more reach now that Instagram thinks our videos are cool. So, that's awesome.
Yeah. Anyways, here we are. Happy 1 year. Cheers. Cheers. We did it. We made it. Okay. So I'll just get into it and you can just...
I'll chime in with my opinion.
Yeah, do it. So I was 41 weeks. I had my 41-week appointment on a Tuesday. That Monday night, we had gone to a Brandon Lake concert at Red Rocks. Yeah. And we really were like, we need to go to this concert because Ledger's named after this dude. His middle name is Lake, after Brandon Lake. And it's because he wrote a song called Gratitude. And I'm sure everyone has heard it. If you haven't, go listen to it. But it like carried us through our pregnancy and through our losses before Ledger. And we're like, okay, we're still pregnant. We're going to this concert. So I bought the tickets literally that morning. We hiked all the way up there. If you've been to Red Rocks, you know. The next day, labor started for me. Like I was having contractions. It wasn't like anything that big of a deal. But I knew that it was like more consistent and happening. And because I was past my due date, they wanted to see me twice a week. So normally my appointments were on Thursdays, but now I had an appointment on Tuesday and Thursday. So I went to my appointment and they confirmed that I was contracting, but my midwife went to like palpate my belly and she's like, I'm having a hard time kind of like determining what his positioning is. Maybe he's like super engaged. I don't know. She like pulled out the ultrasound and she was like, okay, so my midwives were amazing. They were so like the opposite of alarmists. So just so reassuring, huge proponents of that, like birth is not scary. Yeah. There are things that like, they were the right people for me throughout this pregnancy. But so if they had a concern, you were like, okay, that's valid. It's not like they're just trying to scare you. So she sat back and she was like, okay, so your baby is not head down anymore. And I'm like,
fun.
Okay, so he's breech, like what? And she was like, he's actually transverse, so he's laying sideways. She was like, this is super rare. Like we can deliver a breech baby, we can deliver a head down baby. Transverse babies are a bit more complex, is like her wording. And I'm like, okay. And of all of the things that I researched and studied, I had never come across transverse babies. And since then, I've learned more about it, but it's 1 in 500, or maybe it's 5,000 people will have a transverse baby at term. So super rare, probably not talked about for that reason. And she said, I'm not like, this isn't an emergency, but the reason that I'm concerned is that his back is laying across your cervix. And the only thing between his back and your cervix is umbilical cord. So she's like, you're in labor. If you did nothing and your water broke, the cord is the only thing that's going to come out. And because I had done so much research on birth emergencies, because I was planning a home birth at one point, I knew that a cord prolapse is one of the only emergencies during birth that you really don't have time. Like, there are a lot of things that can happen in birth. I think that you have plenty of time still. But that's not one of them. And so I think immediately I was kind of like flustered. I remember calling you because she was like, I want you guys to head to the hospital. I want to flip the baby because that's your best chance at, like, you know, staying away from some kind of emergency.
And for your VBAC.
Yeah.
It's the best chance for you to have the birth you wanted.
Yeah. And I actually felt like decently okay about it because my midwife was so reassuring. She's like, it's going to be an easy flip. You have tons of fluid. Like, I'm not concerned about that. And I was like, okay, I trust you. So I remember calling you and you saying something like, just be prepared when you go to the hospital. OBs are a different story than midwives, as we both know, as I'm sure most people know. They're probably going to give you some kind of dead baby speech.
Yeah, they always give the dead baby speech.
And you know what was funny is, like, not funny. I had never heard that speech before, but that's exactly what happened to me when I got to the hospital. So like,
they want to say, this is if you're going to do this and try a vaginal birth, that puts a lot more liability on me. So let's just cut this baby out so I have no more liability.
Yeah. And yes. And I think that was what was so crazy is she didn't even mention the VBAC. At the time when we were going in for the ECV, she came in because midwives can't do that. The OB had to do the ECV. And so my midwife was there. But the OB came in so hot and heavy and was like, okay, so this is what's happening. We're going to the OR. We're getting a spinal. If this works, great. If it doesn't, we're cutting the baby out. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like,
wait up.
Back up a minute. Okay, not happening. And I literally said, actually, I've watched so many ECV videos. I've watched this procedure done so many times. I don't know why. I was just knee deep in research surrounding birth. So I'm like, they are always done bedside. I've never seen this done in the OR. And she was like, well, here's the reasons it should be done in the OR. Your placenta could abrupt. We could break your water. Your baby could go into distress. You know, all the cord could prolapse, all these things. And I'm like, okay, I don't want to go to the OR. And I don't want a spinal. Well, it's really painful, all this stuff. And if you don't have a spinal and you don't have this, then if there is an emergency, it's a crash C-section versus like I'm like, I'm not getting a spinal and I'm not going to the OR. And she looked at me and she goes, well, if you want to, or no, I was like, I also want to know if the baby flips head down, we can go home, right? Because there's no reason for me to be here anymore. And she said, if you want a dead baby, that's your prerogative. She looked at me and said that. And I said, what are you talking about? If the baby's head down, this is no longer a situation where there might be a cord prolapse. And she's like, and Chase at that point had stood up and asked her to leave the room. Good. And so we were talking with the midwife. He was like, you know what? We don't need to hear that. We'll discuss this with our actual midwife. And you know, she's like, take what she's saying with a grain of salt. And I was like, yeah, I'm not even mad at her. This is what they see. This is what they are. They're just being who they are.
They're surgeons. Yeah. They do surgery.
Yeah. And I'm sure she has seen those things, you know, and that's fine. But like, it wasn't even shocking. And you had told me that. And I was like, it was already in my head. I'm like, whatever. So anyway, she was like, I'm not like, take what she's saying with a grain of salt, but she's not wrong about the fact that if your baby can flip this far along, he probably can flip again. And if labor is the reason he's flipping, then he's going to continue to flip. And she said, of all the years that I've delivered babies, it's very rare for me to see a baby flip during labor at 41 weeks this far along. So she's like, it does happen. I'm not saying it doesn't, but you know, whatever. I was like, let's just do the ECV. And I had a lot of peace about that. Everyone came back in. There was like 7 people surrounding me. It was insane. And we ended up doing it in a triage room in the OR. So still not my favorite place to be. But at least I wasn't in the OR, and at least the backup plan wasn't an immediate C-section. I still felt like I was in the driver's seat. And so they did the ECV. It was probably 5 minutes. Flipped him. He was head down, which they said was like a good and a bad thing. Good thing he's head down. Bad thing, that was way too easy.
Yeah.
So they monitored me, and his heart rate was doing great. So they actually ended up wrapping my belly up to see if they could like contain him to being head down. And I will say this throughout my entire story, like my midwives were so committed to giving me a vaginal delivery. I have never seen people so invested, like,
I love that.
in
the only
someone's
people
story.
invested in my story were the nurses.
Yeah.
Nobody else cared. My first midwife did. It was the second midwife that I could just
no without. She shouldn't even be considered a midwife.
I wrote a really honest review.
Good.
I did.
I'm glad you did.
I told my whole story about it. Go ahead.
Good for you. But they were just so invested. So there's literally 3 of them like wrapping my belly up and telling this baby, stay still. You're like, so then there's a discussion of like, okay, are we going home? Are we staying here? And like I had said, a cord prolapse was probably the only thing lingering in my mind my whole pregnancy, even with Sunny. It's always just been something that I'm like, I don't like that. Like I can deal with some of these other like emergencies that people think happen during birth. This is something that you don't have the time. I don't want to be at home. I'm not going to sleep if I'm like, I couldn't have even told you that my baby wasn't head down anymore. Yeah. So who's to say I'm going to like be able to know if he flips? Yeah. So we decided to stay, and I barely slept. Jason and I had just gotten a cold, like right before we went to the hospital, when you like can't breathe when you're trying to sleep, it was that. It was like the stress. It was like I felt like he was being crazy in there, and I didn't want him to keep flipping. So I'm like sitting in bed holding my belly. And then my midwives were like, the next morning they were going to come check me again and kind of see. And I was contracting all night. And they came back the next morning around like noon. They gave me lots of time. And they went to see where Ledger was, and he was right back to being sideways. And so I'm sitting there, and she's like, okay, well, there's still a lot of options. Like we can go back, do another ECV, and we just have to keep a really close eye on you during labor, because if at any point your water breaks, that's a problem. And she was just kind of walking me through, like, we can just keep trying to flip him. But she was like, there's no guarantee that he's going to stay head down. If your water does break, there's no way we can continue to flip him. So that's kind of like the end of our rope with that. She was like, I'm just going to give you some time to think about what you want to do. She never even brought up a C-section. She left. My nurse came back, who had been with me all night, and she was amazing. Her name was also Amanda. There's so many amazing Amandas in the world. I adored her. Like she had been a nurse for a really long time, and she just spent a lot of time talking to me. She came in, and she was like, can I be a little bit more opinionated than your midwife? And I was like, sure. Go for it. She's like, I just read your birth plan. Everybody out there read your birth plan. And she was like, I really do not want you to have another traumatic birth experience. She was like, in my experience, a baby doing something like this is almost kind of unheard of. And the position that he's in is strange. I just think that sometimes like babies try to tell us something, that we don't know.
100%.
And I'm like, okay, that's an interesting thought. And she was like, and I can't tell you how much I just do not want you to have another traumatic experience. And a cord prolapse is something that I'm literally, my hand is up your vagina. We're rushing to the OR. We're putting you under. You're not meeting your baby. And she was like, this isn't like, this might happen. It's like, this is going to happen if your baby stays in this position. There's no other way that we can like go about it. And she was like, I'm just throwing this out there. You can literally kick me out of the room. We could plan like a really peaceful C-section for later tonight. And we can give you like such a good experience. And we could get your baby here safely, and we could prevent another traumatic thing from happening. And at first I was like, no, I'm not doing that. So thanks anyways. Bye. So she kind of like smiled and left the room. And I decided to start researching like transverse babies. I'm like, is this really that big of a deal? Like, I've never heard of it, you know? And through my research, I found that it's actually inherently like very dangerous to be in labor with a baby laying sideways. Not only for the like risk of cord prolapse, which I was already at an increased risk because I had excess fluid, and the baby's positioning, but just inherently how they're laying with contractions, it's just not good for them. And you're also at like an increased risk if you've never even had a C-section of your uterus rupturing when your baby's transverse in labor. So I brought my midwife back in and I'm like, okay, this is what I'm reading about transverse babies. She was like, first of all, stop Googling. And I'm like, but I was like, I want you to be straight up with me. Like, is this a risk like for me to be in labor right now with a transverse baby? And she was like, I don't really, she's like, basically she was so reassuring that it was almost like, just tell me, like, is this okay? And she was like, I am pretty convinced that transverse babies are one of the reasons that women used to die in childbirth. And I was like, I had to beg for her to get that out of her. I was like, please just tell me, like, can I just go home and labor? Like, is this like really that big of a deal? And she was like, not just because of the cord prolapse situation, just because of the way that the baby would be forced to come out or not come out. The anatomy of the uterus. She was going through all these things. And I'm like, okay, why the heck is my baby sideways? Like, of all the things, this is so rare. So she left again, and I'm starting to like try to push on Ledger's head. Like, now I can feel where it is, and I'm like trying to push it down. And I'm like, it was so easy for them to do the ECV. Surely I can push his head down. And it felt like he was like attached to a rubber band, and he just like kept coming right back up. And my midwives were like able and ready to deliver a breech baby. So it was like, why can't you just either go breech or
go up or down?
I'm not asking for that much. I'm like literally one way. And I just decided, I'm like, okay, I haven't prayed about this at all. We need to pray about this. And I heard the Lord's voice so clearly, and he was like, I'm protecting you from something. And I just like sat there and I cried, and I was just like, why does this have to be my story? And I knew it was his voice. There was so much peace with it. There was no fear. It wasn't scary. It was like, he just straight up was like, I'm protecting you from something. It was right after I was like pushing Ledger's head down, and it kept coming right back up. And it was like, it just felt like so clear. And a bit of a backtrack. I think part of why I was so frustrated is like, I put everything I possibly could, and I know you understand this, like into having a VBAC. I spent so much money and so much time and so much energy. And when I tell you that I went to like multiple Mayan abdominal massages specific for like structuring my uterus for a VBAC, regular massage, chiropractic, acupuncture, spinning babies, several different birth courses and different birth programs, pelvic floor PT, like so many different things that I'm like, and I was so confident. Never once my whole pregnancy did I ever think or even process or conceptualize that I would have a C-section. Yeah. I was like, that's just not my story. That's not what's going to happen. I had like no fear about birth. I was so excited for it. I felt like I had this vision in my head of exactly how it was going to go, exactly what position I was going to birth in, exactly how I was going to be my baby. And so I think in that moment, it just felt cruel because I was like, why can you do all of the right things and try so hard and just for something to be taken away from you at the last minute for something you can't even control?
I know. I do understand.
And I just sat there in between the comment the nurse made about sometimes babies are just trying to tell us something. And then from what I heard from the Lord, I'm like, I no longer have any peace about moving forward with this. I don't pretend to know exactly what he was protecting me from. I think I have a greater idea now that I'm on the other side of it, but I had no choice in that moment but to just trust him. And if you would have seen me the night before, right before we performed the ECV, I was like hysterically crying when they put me in the OR, even in the triage room. I was like, I am not, like, I was literally crying and I screamed at the OB, I'm not having another C-section. Like, how dare you insinuate that that's just like a backup plan, you know? And then like the difference that I was feeling like sitting in the hospital bed after the Lord told me that was night and day. Cause I sat there and I'm like, I told Chase, like, I think we need to plan for a C-section. And he was like, what are you talking? Like, this is my husband who had been like literally trained by me for the last 3 years to never, ever, ever, ever let me, anyone tell me that we were going to go have a C-section. So he's sitting there like, what are you
do I manhandle you right now? Like, should I knock
He's like, do you need a nap? Like, he was so beside himself. And so then the nurses and the midwife came back in and I told them, and they were the exact same way. They're like, Jess, what are you talking about? Like, this is not, you know. But Amanda, the nurse that had talked to me, she was like, I don't want to be responsible one way or the other for whatever you choose, but I really think you're making the right decision. And my midwife said, she was like, I have had all of my babies natural. I'm like such a proponent for natural birth, unmedicated vaginal deliveries, but I would not feel right about continuing. Like, she's like, I'm such a proponent of that. And I want that more for you more than anybody else. But like, I don't think it's a good idea. And so I feel like once I kind of voiced my fears, people were being a little more vocal about theirs, but I could tell they were being so like, they wanted me to have my own intuition, you know, and I'm grateful for that.
Yeah. Not being influenced.
So, we made that decision, and because it wasn't really an emergency. I mean, I was dilating and I was contracting, and it was kind of like, it was somewhat of like an urgency, but it wasn't an emergency. Like the emergency would have been if my water would have broken. But between when we decided that and when we were going back to the OR, every single person that was going to be involved in my birth, so every nurse, the baby nurse, anesthesiologist, the OB, surgeon, every single person that was going to be in that room came into my room separately to tell me, I read your birth story, every single one of them. I read your birth story and your birth plan, and I know that you had a really traumatic birth with your first. This is why and how I'm dedicated to making sure that doesn't happen again. Every single one of them. And even the anesthesiologist, who was a male, came in, and I'm like, and I told him, I'm like, I was panicking the whole time during my last C-section for 2 hours. I had a panic attack. I was puking. I thought I was dying. Nobody told me what was going on. They took my baby away from me, all this stuff. And he was like, that should not have happened to you. Yeah. And here's what's going to happen this time. I'm going to walk you back to the OR. I'm going to be right there to cheer you on. I'm going to tell you everything that's happening along the way, and you're going to crush it. And he was just like, and he was like, you could play your own music. Like, what music do you want to listen to? We can listen to music. We can he's like, I'll be right by your head the whole time. And the surgeon came in, and she was like, yeah, we're just going to take our time. We're going to have fun. I'm going to check you out. I'm going to look at your pelvis. I'm going to look at the anatomy of your uterus. I'm going to look at and just make sure everything's put back exactly how it needs. You know, she was just like, she was so cute. She honestly was kind of like a grandma. At one point I was like, are you like too old to be doing surgery? Like, at what point? Like, she was just like very much like a grandmotherly like presence. But I was just like really blown away because it just felt like every person like really cared. And part of my birth trauma with Sunny is that, and my previous medical trauma before Sunny, is that they don't care. Yeah. And it's a terrifying place because you are kind of on an island by yourself, and there's people touching your body that don't care about you, and they don't know your history. And
people not just touching your body, they're literally ripping it apart.
Yeah. And so, yeah, we made that decision. I was in labor, so we got to kind of like take some fun photos with our doula of like being in labor. And I walked back to the OR. They gave me the spinal while I held my midwife's hands. I laid down. They all did their little meeting of like what everybody's in charge of. And then Chase came in, and we had like the clear drape going on. My pulse was like in the 70s. We were just listening to worship music. I was like laughing and smiling and like having a good time, which sounds so crazy in hindsight. And no one could have told me that would be the case beforehand. But I just felt so much peace, like more peace than I've ever felt in my whole life. And I think that's what makes this story so much different than mine with Sunny, is I heard so clearly from the Lord what I was supposed to do. And he followed that up by like just such a provision of his peace in that room. So much so that I was like so protected by the fact that I didn't know what was really going on, aside from like, it's taking them kind of a long time to get him out. And I guess this is something I also researched afterwards. It's actually pretty tricky to get a breech baby out during a C-section, let alone a transverse baby. Didn't cross my mind at all. Like I knew they said it would be hard to like vaginally deliver a transverse baby, but it's actually hard to get them out even in a cesarean. And so they cut me, and they went up to scoop his feet, grabbed his feet first, and between when his feet and his head came out, it was like a solid almost 8 minutes, which is a long time. So they got his body out, and the anesthesiologist was telling me, oh, his feet just popped out and now his belly. And then I kind of like, that was the end of the updates for a minute. And I heard them talk, like they were talking amongst themselves, like, okay, let's try this. Okay, let's try, just like very calm, but they were trying all sorts of maneuvers to get his head out. It was like very, very stuck. And they had said that I had a ton of fluid. I think they said almost 2 liters of fluid. That might mean someone to someone listening, but yeah, I don't know. That's a lot. It's 2 IV bags full, I'm pretty sure.
I'm pretty sure we only have 4 liters of blood in our body. So
okay, yeah. And he had the cord. It was super, like my placenta was fundal, so it was on the top of my uterus, and the cord was really tight around his neck, but then it was also around his belly and his ankle, and there was still excess below his back. So it's a super long cord. And he was basically suspended against my placenta. Like he could not descend. And so because he was so tightly like bound, it was really hard for them to even get him out. So when he did get out, the anesthesiologist told me like, oh, there he is, he's out. And I was kind of like, oh, maybe they just didn't hold him up high enough because I didn't get to see him. I'm still just like on cloud 9. And apparently, because we had planned on keeping him attached to his cord and the placenta, which I didn't even know was an option.
Yeah, I know.
We were going to keep all of that together and go back to recovery all in one piece. But they had to cut the cord pretty quickly because he was completely limp, completely blue. Chase was the only one who saw him. I didn't see him. And he wasn't responding to just like stimulation. So they had to cut the cord and bring him over, and they had to work on him for a while. His APGARs were like pretty poor. I think his first one was like a 4 or 5. Not good. And that was the thing, is like nobody was panicking. Everybody was so calm. The anesthesiologist just said like, oh, he's just a little stunned. He just needs a little help. And just everyone's language was so gentle and kind and like very aware of what I had been through. And even Chase, like he saw Ledger and he knew he was getting worked on, but he had nothing but joy in his eyes. And so I didn't think anything of it. And he had made it a point to stay with me over being over there with Ledger, because that was something that really scared me of Sunny's birth, is he was gone and Sunny was gone. Yeah. So he stayed by my side, and Ledger was born while we were listening to the song Gratitude by Brandon Lake, which I thought was so cool. And Chase and I were together, like our heads were together when we heard Ledger cry for the first time, and we both cried. And then he went and grabbed him and brought him over to me, and Ledger had a tear running down his face. And I was like, why do you have tears? Like newborns don't, I just remember that being my first thought, is like, newborns don't have tears. What are you doing? And then I was like, you're huge.
Yeah.
So that's when my midwife came over and was like, your baby's 10 pounds, 2 ounces. And I was like, what? And they were like, and your placenta is so huge. Like, we also want to weigh it because it's just so big. And I'm like, okay, what is going on? And I was like, and I wanted to keep my placenta because I wanted to look at it and all the things. So yeah, we went back to the recovery room, and I was just like, and the surgeon kept saying, like, I'm just taking my time. She was like, your last C-section, it looked like your scar was a little crooked. I'm fixing that for you. Like, she was just so sweet. Everyone in the room was just so kind. I can't say that enough. We went back to the recovery room, and I felt I had lost like a significant amount of blood. They want you to lose what's typical is like 800 to 1,000 milliliters with a cesarean. I lost 1,200 with Sunny, but I lost 1,500 with Ledger. And they had told me, we're not going to do a blood transfusion unless you're like clinical. And so they were like, let us know if you feel dizzy or whatever. But I really did not want a blood transfusion. And I was just very confident that my body would like be able to replenish blood loss. I'm just a freak like that. And so I was dizzy, but I wasn't going to say anything to anyone because I really did not want a blood transfusion.
I don't know where that blood's been.
I know. Goodness. Like, I'm like, okay, like, I'm not even going to pick up something off of a public floor. You think I'm going to put someone else's blood in my body? Okay.
If I'm not dying.
If I need that someday, thank the Lord. But I didn't feel like I needed it. I was just going to keep cruising. But I got to look at my placenta. I got to inspect it and like see all the things. I thought that was so cool. Ledger started nursing right away. And yeah, it was like in the moment, and I'm separating that from how I feel now. Mm-hmm. In the moment, I felt so grateful to have had such a peaceful experience. And I felt like, wow, I'm so glad I heard from the Lord. I don't think Ledger would have been okay if we had not done that. I do really feel like that to my core. I can look at Sunny's birth and say, wow, that was 1,000% unnecessary. I'm so irritated about it. Yeah. And this time I'm like, that is why we have C-sections. Yeah. And I've heard from multiple people since then that are involved like heavily in birth and know that word or that world very clearly and have said like you saved Ledger's life by doing that. Because if I had not gone into my midwife appointment on Tuesday, I wouldn't have known that he wasn't head down anymore. I was already in labor. I would have gone home and labored at home. My water would have broken and the cord would have come out. Mm-hmm. And looking back, I'm like, the Lord's hand was really on all of that. Yeah. And I'm really grateful. And I can genuinely say like, it wasn't a traumatic experience. I felt like I got to choose every single thing that happened to me. I felt like everyone listened to me. Everyone respected me. And like being in the OR felt like I was literally just embraced in a warm hug. Like, I don't know how else to describe it. I feel like if I had to ever do that again, I could, you know, and I'd be okay. Mm-hmm. So that was the initial bliss of birth.
Which is like, that's a really big deal. You might not have got the VBAC, okay? Yeah. But you've got a peaceful birth. Mm-hmm. It wasn't what you planned, but you rolled with the punches. You didn't do what I did, which was fight until it was dangerous, to where you needed an emergency cesarean. Yeah. And things were a little easier. I'll say this. Just with Ledger and the transverse thing, because Brady and I are Webster certified chiropractors. I don't practice anymore. He does. And we get sent patients from OBs all the time for breech babies because most OBs don't deliver breech babies. And we'll get a mom at 39 weeks and she's sobbing and she's got an appointment for an ECV then the next day or in a week. And we do our best, but we try to tell moms there are reasons why babies don't flip. Yeah. Sometimes it's a structural thing. Like there's tightness in the body that could be released to allow baby to have more room. Sometimes it's a structural issue. And we usually don't recommend that procedure for that reason. Because if your baby is, just like you said, flipping that late, and you've been doing all the things, there's a structural reason why that's happening. That is what, exactly what you said. That is what doctors are there for. So that was what was so hard, is like my doula was sobbing. Like she was so sad, because she was like, I have never seen somebody fight and advocate and educate themselves so thoroughly to get something. And she was like, I've never wanted this for somebody more. And my midwife looked me in the eyes and she was like, I've been delivering babies for 30 years. I could not have told you to do anything differently. You did everything that you could have in your whole pregnancy. And not that I needed their affirmation, but it was very helpful. Nice. Yeah, it was really nice to hear that from people who like really know what they're talking about, to just I don't have any of those, oh, but what if this, or like I could have done this. And I lived with that horror, all those thoughts after Sunny's birth for so long, and this time I don't have them because I know there was nothing else I could have done. And I don't know why I had so much fluid and such a huge baby and such a huge placenta. Like my midwife didn't seem that concerned. She was like, well, they were all kind of growing in accordance with one another. So it's not like you had some tiny placenta and giant baby, or like tons of, it was all proportional. But when we got home from the hospital, it was like a few days or something, on my birthday, I was like, I have had headache for 3 days. This is weird, because ever since I've seen Brady, I don't get headaches anymore. None. I used to get migraines all the time and it was miserable. So now it's to the point where I'm like, if I get a headache, it's not my norm and it's kind of a red flag. And Brady was at our house that morning to adjust Ledger. And I was like, can you just like look at my neck really quick, because I've had a headache for 3 days. So he adjusted me. And then I was like, we were about to go, Chase had planned some fun, pretty easy things to do like for my birthday. And we were about to leave. And I'm like, I think I should like go take my blood pressure. This is weird. It feels like just a weird headache. And my blood pressure throughout my pregnancy had always been like below 120/80. And it was 148/97 or something. And I was like, oh my gosh, I took it 3 times. And every time it was very, very high. And so then you're on Google again and it's like, oh, you have like postpartum preeclampsia and you're going to die, basically. That's what's going to happen. And so I called my midwives and they were like, yeah, you need to come back to the hospital. And so I went back to the hospital. I was there all day and then back again the next day. And I had to go on like blood pressure medication for a few days, but it was so bizarre. I got cleared. I didn't have preeclampsia. They did all the like blood and urine. Yeah, and no like spinal cord fluid. Like, no, they think that because I had, between the fluid loss, blood loss, baby, placenta, I lost like probably 30 pounds like overnight. Your blood pressure was just like, what the
yes, I think I think it literally was like, wait, hold up. We need to like really compensate for whatever the heck just happened to us. And I felt that, like, I felt this huge shift of like,
oh, I'm sure.
Oh my gosh, what just happened? Because it was just a lot. I got like no stretch marks with Sunny. My belly's covered in stretch marks that I couldn't even see until he was gone, like out of my belly. And just, they had to sew my abs back up. Did I tell you that?
Yeah, you did.
They're like, your abs were not going to come back together. So we sewed them up for you. I'm like, wow, how nice. I'm just like
saved me years of rehab.
And you know what's crazy is I actually have noticed such a difference in my core strength, because when I was pregnant with Ledger, when I was pregnant with Sunny, I felt like I still had core strength. When I was pregnant with Ledger, there was a point in time where I'm like, I have nothing. Yeah. I cannot do anything with my abs. So it was very validating when they said that. And now postpartum, I can go from like, even after a cesarean, laying flat on my back to sitting straight up in bed.
I'm like just getting to that point. Yeah. So weird. Like my abs totally went back together afterwards. Yeah. I had no diastasis recti at 6 weeks postpartum. She's like, I can't even get my finger in there. And I still had a hard time.
Really?
Doing that.
I'm like, well, they really helped me out with sewing up my abs. Yeah, so
that's great.
They said it's not something they normally do, but they felt like they needed to do that.
That's great.
Yeah, so
that's your story.
That is it. I think.
How's postpartum been?
I will say, I think that processing in hindsight has been hard only in the sense that it just sucks to have another surgery. Like, it sucks that you plan for something for 3 years and you don't get it. And it sucks that it impacts the rest of your childbearing years. Mm-hmm. And it changes the options that you have, and it feels like you're with each one your dreams of whatever you're looking forward towards, like whether that's a certain kind of birth or a certain amount of kids, it slowly is like kind of ticking away. Mm-hmm. And so I was just like, tentatively, if we were to have another baby, we'll have another baby. But if we can't have a vaginal delivery next time, if we have a third C-section, I think in my heart that would be it. Unless the doctor went in there and was like, this looks great, you could totally have another one. Mm-hmm. And so we've kind of opened more of the door of like, okay, what does adoption look like? Mm-hmm. We actually just registered for adoption 2 nights ago. And we got an email and they're like, oh, you just welcomed like a newborn into your life. We're so happy for you. You can't start this process until Ledger's 9 months old, I think. Which is fine. I get it. They don't want to give you 2 babies at once. But there's that as an option. There's like, someone the other day was like, well, what about like a surrogate? And I'm like, that would be, but so is adoption. I mean, I feel like everything's really expensive, but
so sad.
It feels like that would be really hard for me. You'd have to do the egg retrieval, you know?
Yeah.
And then it's like, you're pretty much going through an IVF process, and then you might have a lot of embryos. I don't know how that works. Yeah. I would have to learn more about that. Mm-hmm. And then there's like embryo adoption, and there's all these babies that like aren't getting used through the process of IVF, and you can like adopt them.
I didn't know that. Oh my god.
Which like literally brought Chase to tears. He was like, I was like, there's all these babies that are just like there, that like their parents did the IVF process. They decided that they didn't want to use all their embryos or whatever. And then you have the choice of either donating them to science, destroying them, or putting them up for adoption. And so there's like this program called the Snowflake program where you can adopt embryos. But then we would probably adopt an embryo and use a surrogate, because it's not like we wouldn't be able to, you know, it doesn't change. Your anyways, body. Yeah. It's a lot. We're processing a lot. And I know we just welcomed a baby into the world, but I think like that is a toll that multiple cesareans takes on somebody, is you are constantly left with this like feeling and notion that you only have so much more.
Yeah. Brady and I are struggling with that right now, actually. Because he is, with Noah's birth, it was like in between an emergency and like a cool C-section. Like I had not a lot. You've heard my birth story. I didn't have a lot of people in the room. My anesthesiologist was amazing, just like yours was. It was a male. And, you know, it was all good. Lily's was like a true get her out now. She didn't like hold oxygen for 25 minutes. It was really scary. I lost a full liter of blood. Like I lost a lot of blood. And it took a really long time for them to stop the bleeding. Like, so Brady like legit thought that he was walking out of the hospital alone. And he's really having a hard time with that. Whereas I'm like, no, I need to plan. I need redemption from that.
I know.
I need not only that, I mean, I know I want another baby. Like I still feel that pull, like that there's someone there. And you know, Madison sent me Madison was my doula, and I plan on using her because I can't try for a vaginal birth anymore because of my T incision. So I know I'm going to have a cesarean. But she sent me this post, and it was an OB who did a mother-assisted cesarean.
I've seen
and
that.
I'm like so pumped about it right now. So I keep trying to tell Brady about it. And he's like, Amanda, I don't want more kids. I don't want to lose you. I don't want to go through that again. But I'm like, but listen, you can lay down with no curtain and you can pull your baby out of your body. Like, I need to find a doctor stat who can do that for me in like 2.5 years. You know, I think there's like a part of like, you've lost control once, you've lost control again. Like I need control in my story. I really feel like that.
And that, and I think that's something that they just can't understand as men, because Chase feels the same way. He's like, Jess, we just had Ledger. Because I think it was like the 4th night home from the hospital. He was like, what are you researching? And I was like, VBACs after 2 C-sections. And he was like, he's like, you've been doing this for 3 years. We just had a baby. And I'm like, I think it's something, because he was right. I was like, why can't I let this go? I was literally listening. I was on the VBAC Link podcast, listening to podcasts for VBACs after 2 C-sections 4 days after I had a baby. And he was like, why are you doing this? And I was sitting there and I'm like, I think you just nailed it. I think it's just, I need to know that I'm not just going to be left with this unmet dream forever. Like, I just have to keep grasping onto some kind of hope that like what I'm looking for is possible. And whether that just be having more kids, whether that be having a vaginal delivery or having a peaceful planned C-section where you are catching your own baby, you're the first one to meet them.
And
like,
you planned it like more than, just 2 hours.
Yeah. Right? And I'm like, I know it doesn't make sense to somebody who doesn't know, but it feels like the only thing I can control is to continue to just like plan for that. And I think, and I've talked to so many women who have had 2 C-sections since then, even just like random neighbors in my neighborhood that I knew had C-sections, because I've never met somebody who's had more than 2 C-sections. And so I literally have 3 people in my cul-de-sac. I have you, and then I have a friend who lives in Littleton. Her husband was my basketball coach in high school. So between the 5 of them, I'm like, 2 C-sections, 2 babies, and aside from you, they're done. And so I've never talked to somebody about, I was talking to all of them, like, did your doctor say not to? Like, and they all just kind of said like they didn't feel like they really liked either option. Having another C-section, they didn't want to try for a vaginal delivery. They felt like, they had birth trauma from there and they just were done. And I'm like, but I'm not, and so I just keep grasping for these stories of women who are like, okay, but this is how I turned this around. Whatever that looks like.
If you're out there,
I know,
listening to this, DMS. No, for real, you can totally DMS at the Mother Collective Co, because that would be great. Yeah, and I'm actively looking for some kind of doctor that would even take me on, because I hear all like these ethereal things like, oh, this doctor, I found this person 4 hours away from me, but it's like, it'd be really nice to even just have a consult with somebody, like, what makes a good candidate for this? Am I a good candidate for this? Would it be better to just plan a C-section? How do I not grow a 10-pound baby? All the important questions. Yeah. So I want to, because we're running out of time, and I want to talk about something real quick. Yeah. You were really nervous to tell your birth story. You told me, I think I was one of the first people you told, and that was a while after your story happened. Yeah. And you were very nervous about telling your story. Yeah. And I want to talk more about that, because I think that breaks my heart that we live in a world where you, of all people, would have to feel nervous to tell your birth story. Yeah, I do feel very nervous. I felt like weirdly depressed even before coming over here. And every time that I've known that someone's going to drop off food and stay a little while, and they're going to ask me about it. And I think that's because I've immersed myself into this culture of like homeopathy and natural is best, and everything that God intended or that like women are meant for just flows freely and without fear. And I inundated myself with everything birth, unmedicated. I was about to have a home birth. Like, I'm in that camp and I'm surrounded by those people, and I'm so nervous that someone hearing my story would discredit the necessity of a C-section or fail to address that sometimes birth is an emergency or an imminent danger to the baby or the mom. And I know that like women, especially in this kind of community that we're both very much immersed in, just fails to recognize that. And I think that it's really disconcerting to like share your story with somebody who's very naturally minded, or maybe they're
all about home births, and to just kind of watch their eyes or their mouth or whatever just kind of insinuate that you made the wrong decision. Or had you just X, Y, and Z, that wouldn't have happened. Or I know I can just feel them reeling in their minds like, oh, but that happened because of this.
Yeah. And that wouldn't have happened to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's really heartbreaking. And I think it like has the potential to me to like affect relationships in my life, because
well, your birth story, it's like, it's part of you. And if someone's gonna.
Yeah. And how, like, it's almost like, how dare you question what the Lord spoke to me?
Yeah. Even, okay, let's set aside the necessity for this situation. Even with Sunny's birth, even now, all you know, 3 years later, and how it could have went differently, maybe, if you had done something different.
Yeah.
If there's someone sitting listening to your story and they're going to make those judgments on you, and they're going to decide that they could have done something better, they would have done something different, that's not a friend. I know. That's not that's not a woman you need in your life. It is not. You should be able to sit down with somebody who loves you and say, this is what I went through, and regardless of what their history tells them, what filter they're looking through, they should see how much you are a loved child of God, how much you love your child, how much you did the best in the situation that you were given. And they should be so freaking proud of you. I am so freaking proud of you. I'm not joking. I spent those like 3 days on my knees in prayer so much for you, reaching out to Chase, reaching out to you, trying to make sure that you were okay. And when you texted me and said you were going into C-section, I was cheering you on. And when you came out, all I wanted to know was that you were mentally okay after that. And that's all I cared about. That you were physically and mentally okay, because I know you and I know your heart and I know that you killed it. And I was so freaking proud of you. I was so freaking proud of you when we got out, when you got out and you guys came home, and watching you with Ledger. You're a beautiful mother, and you do such a great job. Thanks. And if anybody wants to make a judgment on you for your C-section, I have some words, some serious words. But seriously, I felt that way too. Just don't do that. I don't, you know, I feel like a lot of people in the holistic world, regardless if we're talking about birth or whatever medical procedure, whatever it is, if you know, there are so many things to judge a person on. Just don't. I know. Please. Yeah. We don't need it. You don't need it. That's not how Jesus loves.
Right. Gosh, I freaking love you so much. I know the text that you sent me, I'm like, I literally took a screenshot of it and I've read it so many times, and you were just like exactly what you just said. Like, those are not people that you need in your life. And something, cause I went to my therapist last week, I think. Yeah. Cause I think this postpartum has just been different than it was with Sunny. I think I'm just having a lot more like, I don't know, we can get into that another day, but I think I'm definitely like bordering anxiety, but it's not presenting maybe typically how you'd see anxiety. It's manifesting more so like OCD, which I've always had like somewhat of a tendency towards, but it's to the point where it's like so extreme that it's debilitating. And you know, something that she reminded me of when I was sitting with her is like, we're only in this phase for so long of like childbearing and having all these births and like planning our families. And it was just so refreshing to be reminded, like, there's another side to this. Like, you and all your friends will be done having babies and it won't be the topic of every conversation.
Yeah, gosh.
Because right now you go anywhere with a new baby and you're just met with like immediately like, what was your birth story? What happened? You know, and it's all well-meaning, but it's just so, it feels like that's all that matters. And I recently shared, because I have this like group of girls I hang out with every other week or so, and I walked away because they were so sweet. They wanted to know what happened, but I told them, and I just walked away feeling so like I let people down because it wasn't what they wanted to hear.
They wanted the happy ending for you.
Yeah. And you just feel responsible for that. And I just sat in my car being like, why do I feel so disappointed? And like, why do I feel like they're so disappointed in me? Yeah. So I think it'd be so much it's hard not to wonder like how you would feel on a daily basis if you got to have a VBAC, you know?
No, I 100.
Like, I would feel so much lighter.
I'll never know the feeling of like a vaginal birth ever in my life. That's been really hard to swallow. That's been really hard to swallow. But I think that while we're in this world, we lose our eternal perspective. This time, not even just the childbearing, it's just like us being on earth. It's like such a short amount of time compared to eternity with God. And
our babies that are already up there.
I know. And we're going to spend our entire eternity with our children and our families. And this part of our story, I don't know what it's preparing us for. Yeah. There's a reason that we're learning these lessons. There's a reason why we're going through what we're going through. And I think it's going to make sense on the other side, but I don't think it's meant to make sense now. Yeah. So when you're talking to a mom that has had a cesarean, especially a mom that was hoping for a vaginal birth, don't sit there and say, well, if you wouldn't have had the epidural, if you wouldn't have went to the hospital, if you would have stayed at home, just be proud of them because they just walked through fire to meet their child.
Yeah. And it's like, I don't want to be this person, but maybe I will be this person. Like, I genuinely, in this situation with Ledger, would have been the person that would have died if I wasn't at a hospital.
Well, and what's interesting is you met somebody during this pregnancy. If you want to maybe share a tiny bit about that, I think that was very interesting.
I was very much on the fence, and I almost don't know if I should actually share too much of this story.
No, just very vague.
Okay, I'll be very vague. I was very much on the fence of like, should I have a home birth or should I be with these midwives that deliver at a smaller hospital? Saw them both for like almost 20 weeks. That's the other thing I failed to mention. I also paid out of pocket to be with these midwives who weren't covered by my insurance because they had a 90% VBAC rate. So add that to the list of all the things that we spent our time and money preparing for. But I had just met this girl randomly who had also had a super traumatic first birth and was planning a home birth for her second. And she was so like confident about it. I went home being like, okay, for sure I should have a home birth. Like, she is so cool. Like, she is awesome and she's so confident. I just need to make a decision and like go with it. And she kept texting me because I was like, can we meet up and talk more about this? And all of a sudden just like lost all of my peace about home birth, lost all my peace about meeting up with her. I didn't want to be convinced to have a home birth. I stopped talking. This is kind of extreme, but I stopped talking to anybody who I thought would convince me to have home birth, about birth. So, I really feel like the Lord was protecting my heart in advance because this poor girl and her poor baby had a devastating situation happen during their birth. And I think that would have also been me. Yeah. Like, I really do. I think that knowing what I know now about my situation in the moment, like, yeah.
Well, add in that you were convinced you were having a home birth and you came to my house and told me who your midwife was. And I said, no, you're not.
I know there was so many closed doors. And that's the thing is like, gosh, if you ever doubt God, just come talk to me because I have so many stories that I could share. But this will always be one of them because there were so many closed doors. Every single time I was about to make the decision or I had made the decision, I'm having home birth, something literally punched me in the face. And God knew he was going to redeem my story and it wasn't going to be in the way that I thought.
Well, you killed your birth. I'm proud. I am so proud of you. I'm proud of your ability to listen to the Lord. I'm proud of your ability to listen to your body, to listen to the people that were surrounding you when you needed to, because I didn't do that.
Yeah. I'm so proud of you too. It was so, these babies make it hard on us. And I think that it prepares us to be the moms that we otherwise may not have been. I think we love our kids so deeply, and we would do truly anything for them, and we have
almost die for them.
We have. Yeah. And we've been brought to the end of ourselves, and we've surrendered dreams for eternity. And we were
reborn in our birth just as much as anybody else. And you can't take that away from a mother, whether she has a cesarean, whether it's a planned cesarean or a home birth. You are reborn in motherhood every single time you have a baby, and that doesn't change with the change of setting.
Yeah.
So
we actually changed, this is the last thing I'll say. We changed Ledger's name because of his birth.
Did you really?
Yes. So we had named him for 9 months. His name is Coda, Koda, Coda Lake. And it means like brotherly love. It means blessing. We're like, oh, this is so cute. And after his birth, hearing from multiple midwives, multiple nurses, like, this kid, I've never seen this before. That's what we kept hearing. I've never seen this before, like, from everybody. Yeah. Why is he still flipping? Why is he doing all this stuff? And then when he came out and he was huge, and in Mom Baby, we had heard from multiple nurses again being like, I've never met a baby so strong. Like, I'm not used to fighting babies, because he was having trouble with his glucose after birth, and so they had to prick his little heel like every hour for like 20 hours. So and they were like, this kid, every single one of them was like, this kid is so strong. Like, we were trying to give him a bath, and he was like literally trying to stand up in the bath, and we're like, he's like already holding his head up fully, like he's literally a man.
Calm down. So yeah. And he's got these, you guys, this look about him that he is very so serious. Like, he's like, why?
This is what I keep telling people. I'm like, if I could summarize Ledger, it would be like, he's just so annoyed that he has to be a baby. Like, he straight up is like, I'm a man. Why am I a baby? And so we like immediately got to Mom Baby, and I was like, his name is not Coda. Like, Coda is like this cutesy, like, you know, I'm like, he is a strong dude, and he is like going to be paving his own path in life. And I know he's going to teach me so much about surrender, because that is probably the biggest word that has like infiltrated my mind and my heart since I've met him. And so, yeah, that's like a fun little fact we can leave you with. That. We changed his name after 9 months. I had clothing items with his name on it. I had like decor with his name on it, and it's just not his name anymore. So I was just on the Name Nest, and there was like this reel that was like Moody Fall Boy names, and Chase was dying. He's like, oh, Moody Fall Boy. Like, that's exactly who Ledger is. Moody Fall Boy. Moody Fall Boy. So anyways, that is
all right.
a little fun thing.
Sharing your story.
Yeah.
Don't message us unless I'm proud of you, because I'll fight you.
I know. I think I have better boundaries this time, but I'm like prepared to cut people off over this. So,
all right. We will see you guys next week.
Bye.